Imagine standing inside a factory that once symbolized European certainty. Steel presses, chemical reactors, assembly lines that define the post-war order. Not silent because demand vanished, not idle because labor rebelled, but dark because electricity itself has become unaffordable. This is not a story about scarcity in the physical sense. It is a story about systems, incentives, and belief, about how one of the most sophisticated industrial societies in history misunderstood the difference between energy as an idea and energy as a foundation. Germany entered the 21st century with an advantage most nations would envy: a diversified energy mix, a highly skilled workforce, and an industrial base built around reliability rather than speculation. Nuclear power quietly supplied a quarter of its electricity, providing stable, low-carbon baseload that allowed coal to decline gradually and renewables to grow patiently. The arrangement was not perfect, but it was coherent. It respected physics, time, and the reality that transitions are bridges, not leaps. That coherence broke not because of new data, but because of fear. In 2011, a natural disaster in Japan triggered a nuclear accident thousands of miles away, in a seismic zone Germany does not share. The technical lessons were narrow and specific, but the emotional impact was broad and immediate. Politics responded not to probability or system design, but to public anxiety. Within days, Germany committed to eliminating nuclear power entirely, not after replacement capacity was secured, but immediately. Functioning, paid-off assets were switched off by decree, not because they failed, but because they symbolized discomfort. This decision reshaped everything that followed. When you remove a stable pillar from a system before building another, the system compensates wherever it can. Germany compensated with subsidies, vast ones. Hundreds of billions flowed into wind and solar, not to expand capacity into a surplus, but to replace something that already worked. The country was spending to stand still. Electricity prices rose steadily, then sharply, because households and businesses were paying not only for power, but for policy, and despite the scale of investment, emissions stagnated. When weather failed to cooperate, coal returned, not as an emergency, but as a necessity. The cleanest form of baseload power was removed, and the dirtiest fossil fuel filled the gap. Intermittent energy requires backup. Without nuclear, and with coal politically constrained, natural gas became the keystone. It was flexible, cleaner than coal, and essential for industrial heat. Germany did not produce enough of it, so it relied on imports, guided by a theory that trade itself could transform geopolitics. Economic entanglement was expected to neutralize strategic risk. Pipelines were not treated as vulnerabilities, but as guarantees. Over time, dependence deepened until more than half of Germany's gas came from a single supplier whose interests were never aligned with Europe's long-term security. When that assumption collapsed, it did so violently. Sanctions, supply cuts, and sabotage turned energy markets into shock absorbers for geopolitical reality. Prices did not rise gradually, they spiked vertically. For industry, this was existential. Energy costs multiplied faster than margins could adapt. Governments intervened not to optimize, but to prevent collapse, bailing out utilities and subsidizing consumption at extraordinary scale. What had been marketed as a transition became an emergency response, one paid for by public debt and long-term competitiveness. At the same time, ideology constrained options. Nuclear was gone, coal was unacceptable, gas was hostile and expensive. Liquefied natural gas arrived as a substitute, but at a premium that erased the economic logic of German manufacturing. The advantage that had sustained exports for decades had quietly depended on cheap, reliable energy. When that disappeared, the business model fractured. Capital responded rationally. Investment flowed toward regions where energy was abundant, predictable, and politically stable. Factories downsized, projects relocated, and decisions once unthinkable became inevitable. The effects were not abstract. Chemical plants that anchored entire regions reduced output or closed. Jobs that defined the middle class vanished without ceremony. These losses were not cyclical. Industrial ecosystems, once dismantled, do not reassemble easily. A nation built on making things found itself increasingly focused on managing decline while describing it as transformation. Infrastructure compounded the problem. Renewable energy was concentrated where geography allowed, not where demand lived. Transmission lines lagged behind generation, delayed by permitting, opposition, and compromise. Power could not move efficiently across the country. So excess energy in one region coexisted with shortages in another. Grid operators paid producers not to generate electricity, while fossil plants restarted elsewhere to keep factories alive. Consumers paid twice, once for energy they never received, and again for energy they were told to abandon. Policy then turned inward, toward households. Heating systems became the next frontier. The technology was sound, but the implementation ignored context. Mandates arrived faster than homes could adapt, costs outpaced subsidies, and communication collapsed into coercion. The result was not acceleration, but resistance. People acted defensively, locking in old systems to avoid uncertainty. What was meant to signal progress instead entrenched the past. Official statistics eventually showed success. Emissions fell to levels not seen in generations. But the reason was not innovation or efficiency, it was contraction. Energy-intensive production declined sharply, and with it, the emissions associated with making things. The atmosphere benefited, but the system did not. Reducing output is not the same as transforming it. A system that shrinks to meet targets is not sustainable. It is retreating. The contradiction became clearer when compared with neighbors who made different choices. Countries that retained nuclear power maintained lower emissions and lower prices simultaneously. Electric vehicles charged on cleaner grids. Industry adapted without fleeing. Germany, despite its ambitions, found itself importing electricity that was cleaner than its own, while insisting on moral leadership from a system it could no longer stabilize. By the middle of the decade, the outlines of the lesson were visible. Energy policy is not a statement of values. It is an architecture of constraints. It must obey physics, geography, and time. When belief overrides those constraints, costs accumulate quietly until they arrive all at once. Germany's experience demonstrates that removing reliability before replacement does not hasten the future. It destabilizes the present. There may yet be paths forward. Engineering capacity remains. Capital still exists. But rebuilding coherence takes longer than dismantling it, and trust, once broken, is slow to return. For the rest of the world, the significance is not national, but systemic. This is what happens when legitimacy is sought through symbolism rather than outcomes, when policy rewards intention over structure, and when transitions are declared complete before they are physically possible. Money, in the end, records belief. It flows toward systems that endure and away from those that deny their own foundations. Germany spent vast sums learning that lesson. Others would do well to observe it, quietly, before repeating it.